Welcome to Mrs. True Crime, and happy Black History Month. Today's video is an in-depth look into the murders of Chanelle Pickett and Rita Hester. It's a tale of brutality and insensitivity. If you are triggered by anything dealing with death, feel free to click off this video. Perhaps check out my gaming channel, Retell Me Games, for some lighthearted content. If not, I'm Nicole. Let's get started. I'm a cis female, meaning that I am biologically female and identify as a woman, but just because that's how I identify doesn't mean that's how everyone else does. There are those born biologically female who identify as a man, or those born biologically male and identify as a woman, or even non-binary, meaning they don't identify as any particular gender. Sex and gender is wild. I mean, there's more than two genders, the social and cultural characteristics associated with one sex, and way more than two sexes, the identification based on genetic characteristics. Some announce their gender identification with pronouns included and leave it as that, while others want their outside to match how they feel on the inside. Take Chanelle Pickett and Rita Hester, for example.
Yeah, we would buy lipsticks and she'd find them in our coats and kind of thing. We wore eyeliner since 6th grade, so it's not like anybody wouldn't be able to tell if you have eyeliner on. You know what I mean? And we were, a lot of the times when we went down the street, people just thought we were girls.
Though their birth certificate said male, neither Chanelle nor her twin sister Gabrielle Pickett considered themselves as such. Dressing up in dresses and heels as early as 7 years old, they continued to blossom their gender identity, fully encompassing their womanhood by the age of 13. At the age of 14, their mother found them in a gay youth center and turned her back on them, placing the two into foster care. Despite her bitterness towards her children, Gabrielle stated on the Jenny Jones show that she had no ill will towards her mother. Without their mother, however, the twins decided to go into high school as young women, and for a time, they were popular. But their foster mother told their principal their assigned gender, and soon the word spread. Once they'd gotten around the school, the two were bullied harshly. The pair took up short-term jobs in order to save up for sex change operations. They began hormone therapy when they were around 20. Somewhere down the line, the two landed a job for NY Next, a telephone company that served most of New York from 1984 to 1997. They worked in their sales department in Marlborough, Massachusetts in 1995. They were then transferred to Braintree. After a month, Chanelle switched to the MIS department, and soon she felt like she was in high school again. In the MIS department, Chanelle worked under Deborah Shea. It's unclear if Shea was abrupt with Chanelle upon first meeting, but Chanelle felt uncomfortable around her new boss. Eventually, Shea began to negatively state that Chanelle was a pre-op transgendered woman. She spoke to Shea's supervisor, but she sided with Shea. 6 weeks later, Chanelle was fired. The excuse for her termination was an incident between her and Shea. A month afterward, Gabrielle left the company. Out of work, the sisters decided to live off of boyfriends and admitted to turning a few tricks to make ends meet. They frequented gay bars in the Boston area, and this is where they met William Palmer. William Palmer was a 35-year-old computer programmer who frequented well-known gay and trans hangouts, such as Jackie's and the Playland. The Playland is where he was introduced to the Pickett twins on November 20th, 1995. The three of them hit it off immediately. Chanelle at one point told Gabrielle that she thought Palmer may want a relationship with her. They went back to Chanelle's place and smoked crack together, but when Palmer couldn't convince Gabrielle to engage in a threesome with them, he and Chanelle left to go to his place. His roommates will recall that he arrived at 3 or 3:30 a.m. At 5 a.m., they awoke to sounds of a struggle and an unfamiliar voice shouting religious epithets. Palmer shouted at her to be quiet, yelling that she'd wake the house. In other reports, he says neighborhood. But the commotion didn't end. Soon there were loud screams and continuous pounding on the wall. Palmer's roommates remember hearing a muffled voice, and then it slowly diminished and all was still. The roommates asked Palmer if everything was okay and tried to get into his room, but couldn't. Palmer replied, "I've got a crazy bitch in here, but I've got it under control." The next morning, Chanelle was unresponsive in Palmer's bedroom. While Palmer and his roommates talked and debated on what to do, no one called medical attention for Pickett. Sometime around lunch, Palmer called his lawyer, who called the police. Palmer was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, but the defense argued that he didn't know Chanelle was pre-op when they met. The defense continued that Chanelle flew into a cocaine-induced rage when Palmer rejected her, yet witnesses testified that Palmer was a regular at gay bars. The medical examiner testified there were massive injuries to Chanelle's throat, her face was beaten, and bedding may have been stuffed down into her throat. The examiner also concluded that the levels of cocaine found in her body were too low to have contributed to her death. Palmer himself stated that he hit Chanelle and sat on her for 10 minutes before going to bed. The official cause of death was strangulation, and Palmer's trans panic defense lessened his verdict. He was found guilty of assault and battery on May 3, 1997, and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Out of the verdict, Gabrielle said, "This sends a message to anyone who dates a transsexual, that they can beat the person up and it's okay. You can say you didn't know, you say drugs were involved, you can make up any excuse and get away with it." Somewhere in Alston, Rita Hester heard about the death of her fallen sister and said, "I'm afraid what will happen if Palmer gets off lightly. It'll just give people a message that it's okay to do this. This is a message we cannot afford to send." 3 years later, Hester would be on the receiving end of that message. Found in her first-floor apartment on November 28, 1998, just 2 days shy of her 35th birthday, Rita Hester had been stabbed 20 to 25 times. Miraculously, she wasn't dead, but on her way to the hospital, she had succumbed to her injuries. The call came in around 6:20 p.m. that there was a disturbance at her apartment. Nothing had been taken, and there wasn't any signs of forced entry. Whoever killed Rita has managed to get away with murder for 2 decades. Rita was out for 10 years. She was a rock and roll musician and performer who danced at places like Jackie's. She was infamous and was flooded with love wherever she went. People described her as ebullient, glamorous, and a sister diva friend with attitude. She was statuesque, standing 6'2" with long braids down her back. Of all the people who knew her or heard of her, there wasn't a negative statement made about her, but the newspapers were a different story. Both Chanelle and Rita's deaths were mentioned in articles and television spots, but seldomly were they reported as women. They were judged for their appearances, their birth names spoken, and their extracurriculars shamed. Like Chanelle, Rita also lived off boyfriends, using the alias Naomi, but it's unclear if that played a role in her death. Rita was last seen at Alston Silhouette Lounge, and 2 men, one she knew, followed her from the bar. Whether one or both of these men killed her or knows what happened that night has never been determined. The outcry of rage and support for Rita was apparent, and when Gwendolyn Ann Smith, a transgendered woman and activist, found out about her, she had to do something. It began as a web project entitled Remembering Our Dead, with a virgil in 1999 in San Francisco, to honor Rita. Soon, the event spread. From Boston to Hawaii and beyond and across waters, events were held to honor, remember, and come together for the fallen. These events fueled Transgender Day of Remembrance, TDOR, and they are held every November 28th. 2017 was reportedly one of the deadliest years for transgendered individuals, with the toll being between 26 and 28. Most of the deaths were of people of color. According to FastCompany.com, 75 of the 102 murders in the U.S. were black. So far, in 2018, there have been 3 murders of transgendered individuals. Kathleen Hester, Rita's mother, said that there were 2 reasons as to why her daughter's death wasn't handled the way she wanted. And I quote, "1, she was gay, or whatever they want to call it, and 2nd, she was black and poor, and that's why they didn't care." In 2006, on Kathleen's urgency, Rita's case was reopened, but it continues to remain unsolved. The fate of Gabrielle Pickett, Chanelle's sister, is also unknown. Some reports state that she was murdered in 2003, but there hasn't been anything concrete to support this. Chanelle, Gabrielle, and Rita all wanted to be accepted and respected, but instead they were met with violent ends with lackluster outcomes. I'm Mrs. True Crime, and remember to be kind, be loud, be aware. For more information about Chanelle, Gabrielle, or Rita, why not check out some of these awesome links? And if you like what you saw and heard today, why not drop a like and a comment? Maybe subscribe while you're here? I make new videos every Tuesday and Friday, and you don't want to miss what's in store.